the next day, when Ken was on the floor and he made his speech and said, we had a caucus vote in the Republican Party yesterday, and I lost. So therefore, I'm withdrawing my name from nomination. We were absolutely floored because nothing had ever been said in all of the weeks before the vote about there being any chance that he would drop out for any reason, whether he lost the caucus or not, whether Wayne Christian was with him or not, whether Warren Chisholm was with him or not. He never alluded to the fact that he was considering dropping out for any reason. So there was just a huge amount of disappointment. We felt really humiliated.
You say you're a conservative.
Right.
Doesn't jive anymore with me.
Right. And I think that one thing that really surprised me when I first heard that Ken was running, at first I thought, okay, well, this is going to be interesting. Because as long as he was in the legislature, I was content not to really say anything about some things that I knew from working within the campaign leading up to the vote. But then on the campaign trail, when he started bragging about his courage for challenging his party and that he had stood up to Joe Straus, I mean, I'm sorry, I have to call foul.
That is an outright lie.
It is. It was never about just challenging Joe Straus. There were two very clear goals to the mission.
You notice his campaign ads don't say you can't always get what you want.
Yeah. That's true, they don't.
If I was one of his opponents, I would play that over and over and over again.
But as they said, with Joe Straus, you get what you need.
Well, it was just, to hear him say that, it was just, I couldn't believe it. And then I thought, okay, well, I know all my Tea Party friends, the leaders, they're going to immediately, say, I'm sorry, this is not going to fly. And to my absolute shock, all of these Tea Party leaders stood up and endorsed him. But then as Rob and I were talking about this, because both he and I were the only ones that were really involved with him specifically, with that campaign going down the stretch, I realized that we knew things that nobody else knew. We knew things. We saw decisions that the campaign made that were not consistent with a campaign that was planning to try to really win. And even Alice did not know, because Alice had come onto the Women on the Wall board about a month before the events that we did at Storybook Ranch and our involvement in that. And so I didn't even tell Alice what had happened. Rob and I were just like, okay, well, it's over. We're just not going to, discuss it. So I didn't even tell her, because I knew that she worked a lot with all of the people up in North Texas in this area, and I didn't really want to upset her about it. But after all of this started happening, I thought she really needs to know some of the things that went on that no one else knows about. And it's hard to put too much fault on people that don't know. So that's one reason we felt compelled to really step up and start explaining some things that we thought people should know about. And so that's kind of how House of Straus came about. But it was sort of something that Rob had been thinking about for many years, because we knew the speaker's race was coming around again. Here we go again, another speaker's race. And just started to look at the mistakes that had been made and what had happened, to analyze it and try not to make the same mistakes.
Right.
Learn.
Take a look at it, really, and see what had gone wrong. So he had been thinking about it, and we've been discussing it off and on for a long time, but this really sort of moved it to the forefront with mainly Paxton's revisionist history that he started crafting the moment he made his withdrawal speech, because at no other time had he ever said, I challenge anyone to show us a piece of footage where he ever said, well, I'm going to keep my name in the running unless I lose the caucus, or unless somebody, pulls support. He never said that. Not
No.
one single time.
Not one time. I was
Not
there.
one time.
Yeah.
And if he was feeling that way the night of the 10th, when everybody was standing there, would have been a perfect opportunity for him to say, well, guys, I think nothing. He said nothing. And in fact, went back to Wayne Christian's office, and they did one of the updates videos where he was still telling people to come to Austin.
Yes.
And they released a press release at 7:49 that night saying, the people deserve transparency, a vote on the floor, and that's why I'm going to keep my name in.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry.
It
You
doesn't
just have to
jive.
speak the truth here, and it's not consistent with a campaign that ever was going to seriously try to win,
Right. Right.
in my humble opinion.
Right.
Well, and it matters because the general public doesn't
No.
know all of this. All they think is that he's endorsed by Ted Cruz. He's got to be the guy.
Mm-hmm.
But even that
Right.
is deceptive
Mm-hmm.
because he has not been endorsed by Ted Cruz.
Mm-hmm.
And there are many of us that are part of the Cruz crew that were involved in getting Ted Cruz
Mm-hmm.
elected, because I can guarantee you, if Ted Cruz says he's going to stand,
Mm-hmm.
he stands.
Mm-hmm.
And he stands for hours and hours and hours.
Right.
And he will not falter.
Right.
And I'm sorry, as someone who worked tirelessly, as so many of us did, for Ted Cruz, it's offensive to me
Mm-hmm.
for you to use a man that I worked so hard for
Mm-hmm.
that would stand
Mm-hmm.
to get you elected, because at some point you have to look at your record.
Mm-hmm.
And
Right,
it's a different
right.
record.
And Mel, we were just talking about this earlier when we had some people here in the studio about how that particular advertisement is being perceived
Right.
Right.
as an endorsement, because a lot of people just really don't understand how all that works.
Exactly.
And you have a friend who mentioned that, right? He
Yes.
said-
Just here in the studio.
Yeah, it was
He said,
Rick Rose.
Yeah, yeah. They were just saying, well, we thought that was an endorsement. And it's like, no,
no,
That's right.
it's
It-
not.
it wasn't.
So that's sort of that's a pattern that I have now seen in Paxton's campaign, and it's very disturbing to me, because when you call in the grassroots and you ask them to support you and to stand with you, and we showed up in record numbers, people took off from work, they spent their own money,
Right.
they had better things to be doing, I'm sure.
Right.
Right.
And then to call everybody down there and at the last minute pull the wool out from everybody, including the 14 that
Yes.
stood with
That-
you.
Exactly. One thing I think that's interesting, and I want to reiterate this, is that Ken Paxton, I believe, is not the man for Attorney General.
Right.
And I know that most of us would not even be speaking
Right,
out
right.
if he wasn't running for Attorney General
Right,
of the
right.
state of Texas, one of the most powerful positions in the state of Texas. It's a problem for me.
I'm
It's-
amazed that
Yeah.
any of them that Paxton would even consider having anything to do with a bill from Bennett Ratliff that had anything to do with education at this point.
Exactly.
Mel?
There's a lot of money flowing around behind the scenes
Uh-huh, I
that
think
we're
so.
not seeing. And you talk about corruption. It exists in this, not only in our federal house,
Right.
but in the state house.
Oh yes, uh-huh.
Exactly.
It's rampant.
Right. And that was so much of what the speaker's race was about. It was really a reform movement. And
Right.
that was why it was so important. It was not just about Ken winning or whoever it would have been. If it would have been Chisholm, it wasn't just about winning. That would have been great. That would have been wonderful. But none of us really thought that was going to happen the first time around. I mean, you're not going to change something that's been one way in one session.
Right.
So it has just really amazed me that so many of our friends seem to forget what the second goal of that mission was,
Right.
which was the list, to force them to a floor vote where those people who ran around the state claiming to be our conservatives would have to vote, and then we would have the list of who to primary. And everybody knew that.
Yes, they did.
But for some reason, by the time Ken got to the floor, he seems to have forgotten. It was just now all about him winning or losing. And our friends seem to have forgotten. You know, and Mel, we were just talking about the effect of his withdrawal, who benefited.
Right. He gave everybody cover.
Right.
Everybody got cover. Even those that campaigned on voting against Straus got cover. Is exactly what happened.
And then because what they did was they went back to their districts and they said, well, there was
yeah.
only one person on the ballot to vote for. What was I supposed
that's
to
right.
do?
No, what else was I going to do?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Strategies and tactics of the political machine.
And and we know they met beforehand before they go into session. They meet. I can promise you, everybody, this was scripted.
It certainly seems that way, and
perception is everything. And we are in a different time now. The grassroots is motivated. The grassroots is powerful.
Yes.
And the power of we become the media.
Right.
The power of us being able to have this show today and to be able to take this video and share it with our friends and neighbors and all of those voters.
Right.
We have the power to hold these people accountable.
And actually, on the floor that day, when Ken spoke in his speech, which, by the way, is posted on the website along with David Simpson's, he said something about, you need to hold us accountable. Well, Ken, that's what we're doing.
There you go.
We're holding you accountable.
You asked for it.
And the sad thing is that now every time we talk about this, the first thing out of our friends' mouths is, why aren't you talking about David Simpson withdrawing? Why aren't you talking about Brian Hughes? Well, David Simpson didn't have a chance after what Ken Paxton did. It had long-term consequences. Right. And that's why it was so upsetting. And he knew it because he talked about it at our event on the 19th. He said, if we don't take him out now, it's going to get harder to do.
Yes.
So knowing full well that was what was going to happen, and David Simpson, I think 4 people stood up with him.
Well, and David Simpson in his speech was honest.
Yes.
He said, I have to pull out because my fellow, elected officials will not support me.
Yeah. Yeah, that's basically what he said. And the other thing that's very interesting, when you compare and contrast those two withdrawal speeches, David Simpson spoke at length about why it was so important for us to do what we did, for us to try to change the leadership and what brought us to that point. Ken Paxton's, almost his entire speech it sounded like a campaign speech. There was a tiny little segment. And I just think it's very telling, the contents of both of those speeches. I'm sure people will disagree, but,
Well,
what do you think? You were there that day.
Well, I mean, hey, the campaign speeches come out automatically.
Right.
They can't keep from it.
Right.
It's just, and I felt I felt like it was a campaign speech, that's for sure.
Yeah. And I will never, ever fault David Simpson because I know that at least he spoke the truth and he was honest enough to tell what was going on behind the scenes.
Yeah.
And when Ken looked up at the gallery and said, first of all, he talked about all of his best friends in the House.
Oh, yeah.
And then he looked up to us and said, you have some of the best leadership. And we're all thinking, what?
And there was one part in there where he said, I think he said your agenda and my agenda.
Yeah.
It may not have been that word, but that was really telling.
Right. He mentions that in several different speeches that he gave. In fact, the night before, that's where you're thinking about.
Right.
My cause is your cause.
Yeah, he said, we
exactly.
believe in your cause, you believe in our cause. And I remember thinking,
what exactly is their cause?
I remember thinking, I thought we were on the same page here. I thought we had the same cause. Why are you saying that?
Right.
So, of course, everything was happening so quickly, and I think it caught everyone so off guard.
Right.
And I know I just sort of wanted to forget about it because it was so painful. And Alice has even gotten attacked for the fact that thinking about this, remembering it, brought her to tears. And I thought, the tremendous amount of work
that everybody did.
Yes.
I mean, the amount of money. So here you've got all these, campaign donations going back and forth. People, elected officials raising all kinds of huge amount of money for their reelection campaigns. And the grassroots spent our own money. We spent time. That effort was all on the people.
Right.
And so, I think moving forward, we're in a different time, and WBTM is going to be a powerful force for getting the truth out.